This is the election that will define this generation. Do we build on the work that's been done these last 5 years, or do we go back to square one and waste all the sacrifice and all the effort that's been put in?
For 5 years, this country has been run for the richest and most powerful. But tomorrow is your day. Tomorrow it's your voice that counts.
British Prime Minister David Cameron, then Labour Party leader Ed Miliband making a final appeal to voters on the last day of the campaign in the UK. Millions of voters expected to cast their ballots for what could be one of the tightest elections in the history of the United Kingdom. Now, it's important to understand the UK is not the US. This is not a presidential election. The Prime Minister is chosen by the party that picks up a majority of seats in the House of Commons. Still, this election could bring major changes. With all of that in mind, let's bring in our panel. Joining us now, former chief foreign correspondent for the Washington Times, Martin Sieff, and also with us, the president and chief correspondent of Feature Story News, Simon Marks. Gentlemen, to you both, welcome to Newsmax Prime. And Simon, first to you. It is so good to have you both with us. Simon, how close do you think this will be?
I think it's going to be very close, JD, and you heard David Cameron there talking about this being a defining moment in British political history. He was obviously hoping that people were going to get out and vote for the Conservative Party and perhaps even maybe provide him with a clear majority to rule the country going forwards. The opinion polls suggest that that is very unlikely. Neither Conservative nor Labour expected to emerge with that clear majority. We could be heading into weeks of coalition negotiations, and perhaps also the beginning of a new era in British politics in which we will all have to start thinking about Britain in the same way that we currently think about countries like Italy and Israel, where there are always, for decades now, coalition negotiations that lead to governments being cobbled together and then they prove to be somewhat fragile over the medium term. So this is a very big day for British politics indeed.
Martin Sieff, Simon makes a good point about the specter of a coalition government. But before we get there, let's talk more about the Labour leader. Let's talk about Ed Miliband. Just how far to the left is Mr. Miliband?
I think he's a lot further to the left than American coverage has indicated so far, JD, and I think it's likely that the dynamics of politics will pull him further to the left. I think we're going to see US-British relations under more strain during any Miliband government, if he wins, if he forms the government, than we've seen since at least the Suez Crisis, which was nearly 60 years ago.
Wow, that portends a big change in American-British relations. Simon, first to relationships among the several parties in Britain, the whole specter of the coalition. Nigel Farage and UKIP expected to do fairly well in this election, pick up some seats. Is it possible, if this is really on the knife's edge, that the Conservatives prevail, forming a coalition with UKIP?
Well, you know, they have certainly the potential. I mean, there's no question that David Cameron and the Conservatives would, in coalition negotiations, naturally, philosophically hew towards UKIP and Nigel Farage. The Labour Party, you would think, would naturally hew towards the Scottish National Party, which it seems is going to destroy the Labour Party from a parliamentary perspective in Scotland. All of this means that the whole issue of the future of Scotland, whether it remains part of the United Kingdom, whether it seeks independence, will be back on the agenda, and on the agenda too in any of those coalition negotiations that could involve Nigel Farage, the future of Britain's membership of the European Union, because he of course wants Britain out of the European Union, and David Cameron at the moment is only promising a referendum on the issue.
And Martin Sieff, again, when it comes to the relationship between the UK and the US, with the Labour leader, with Ed Miliband, wanting a law that would ban Islamophobia, will we see a major change in national security and foreign policy if, in fact, Miliband and Labour is able to prevail?
They will say no. If Miliband wins, everyone will say and rush to say business as usual, and it will not change overnight. But yes, you are correct, there will be major slippage. Basically, Margaret Thatcher defined the parameters of Britain's close to the US relations internationally, and free market, keep government stable relations within Britain, and both those parameters were followed by previous Labour Prime Ministers, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, and Ed Miliband will bust both of them. He will be a radical Prime Minister.
Well, on
and
that
JD, there
note,
has to be nervousness.
I would say it's got to be a nervous time, an anxious time. Gentlemen, we're going to monitor these results very closely from across the Atlantic, and we may have you back to discuss coalition building or the effects once all the votes are counted and the different constituencies report in. Simon Marks, Martin Sieff, we thank you so much for your comments. You heard what our friends had to say about the British election. What's your take? Why don't you send me your comments via email? There's also Facebook and Twitter. And we're coming back on Newsmax Prime.